All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone who is here. I hope that the sun is shining wherever you are, and that you and your families are safe and well. I want to welcome you to the 7th in the monthly webinar focused on mental health and well-being for biomedical researchers. And today we're going to talk about executive functioning and attention. Sitting right next to me here at my desk is a part of the Washington Post, and right under the fold is an article, "Colleges See an Urgent Mental Health Crisis, Pandemic Disruptions Raise Students' Feelings of Isolation and Inadequacy." And the honest truth is, I think that you could replace student with biomedical researcher, with scientist, with graduate student, maybe with every type of community you could imagine. But it is really clear that before the pandemic, many biomedical researchers and trainees were struggling with wellness issues and mental health issues. And it is clear as well that the pandemic has exacerbated the situation. And as scientists, we tend to want to focus on doing experiments and talking about data, and we don't always talk about hard issues like mental health and wellness and stress management and grief and loss. And so I want to thank those of you who are here today, because the more we have these discussions in community, the more our community will change. And so I appreciate each and every one of you for coming. I also would like to encourage all of you to please stay for the second part of the program, which is the small group discussions. There is a very dramatic drop-off in numbers between the talk and the small group discussions. I appreciate we are all busy. We are all juggling so many responsibilities between work and home. But I really think that culture change in the biomedical research community is going to take a whole lot of talking together, a whole lot of listening, a whole lot of working to change our views and to change our language around how we view ourselves in our community. And so I hope you'll stay today. I am really pleased to introduce Lori Chaikin-McNulty, who works closely with me on the resilience training program and on other wellness activities in the OITE. She will be talking today about executive functioning and attention, and she is really quite humble in not including her important book on this topic as a reference at the end. Lori has changed in a lot of ways my thoughts around working with biomedical trainees, and I'm glad you're all going to get a chance to hear from her today. Before I turn the floor over to Lori, I just want to remind you of several things. So Lori, if I could have the next slide. The next part of our series is the psychology of career decision-making. It is on May 3rd and kicks off the NIH Virtual Career Symposium, and I welcome you to that discussion. After that, we will be talking about trauma. When I initially was talking with Lori and Annie Shiner, the other wellness advisor who has helped me think through this series, I was really thinking about trauma in a different way. But really the last year has been a collective trauma for many trainees of color. It has been trauma on top of trauma. And I think it's important that we gather together to talk about that. That will be June 7th, and then we will end the series this year in July in talking about welcoming colleagues on the autism spectrum. I really haven't thought much beyond July. Please email me, sharon.milgram@nih.gov, with your thoughts about the series and how we might continue moving forward after a short summer break. So if you want to watch previous webinars, go to the YouTube channel. If you wish to come to the 3 that are upcoming, go and register. Next slide, please. I just wanted to remind you that all of these talks are archived on our YouTube channel. Please register there and you'll get updates as we upload new programs. The entire resilience series that we've been offering should be up there within the next few weeks. There are a variety of really great resources. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to remind you to please use the Q&A for your questions. I'm not going to stop Lori along the way for questions, but she is going to leave a lot of time at the end for questions. So again, I want to thank all of you for coming. It means a lot that you value the health and well-being of the biomedical research community by taking time. So with that, Lori, I'm going to mute myself and turn this over to you.
Thank you, Sharon. All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to talk today about executive functioning, its role in the biomedical research world, and be able to get to some concrete tools about sort of how are we managing executive functioning. So Harvard refers to executive functioning as the CEO or the air traffic control system of our brain. And it's not necessarily one thing, but rather it's an aggregate of a large variety of skills. And this is not the sort of comprehensive end-all be-all list, but this is when you're looking through what does executive functioning mean and what skills does it involve. This is a pretty comprehensive list of that. So I really like to think of executive functioning as a set of skills that works in conjunction with each other. And we separate them out because they are separate individual things, but really they all work in, harmony and conjunction with each other. So, emotion regulation is an example of an executive function, but if you're not using flexible thinking and if you're not using problem solving and decision making, it's hard to regulate emotions. The same thing with task completion. You need your working memory and you need your time management. You actually probably need all of these for task completion, right? So when we think about these things, they're separate individual skills that we can bolster individually, and yet it's important to remember that all of these sort of work together oftentimes. So something to just know is that our executive function is housed in our prefrontal cortex, which we know is not fully developed or mature until the mid-20s. So if we're thinking about that just from a global perspective, that is something that is still continuing to grow and change into our mid-20s. So it's important to think about that as we're thinking about sort of where we're still needing building in those skills. So attention, you'll notice probably was not on that list. And some people say attention is an executive function, and some people say it's something that's a little bit separate, but they're critical and they go together. So I wanted to make sure we talked about attention as well as our executive functions. The thing that we'll talk about mostly today is selective attention. Now, selective attention is the thing that we think about when we're talking about executive function, and we say, you just need to pay attention, right? They're not paying attention. That often is what we're thinking about is selective attention. And that's attending to stimuli, choosing to attend to some stimuli while ignoring others. And oftentimes that's sort of an automatic thing. We have to make an effort to choose to pay attention to one stimuli over another. So for example, if you see this Stroop experiment here, the top left corner, if I asked you what color that is, you would have to make an effort to say red instead of saying black, because you have to choose which part of that you're paying attention to. The other types that I wanted to mention are dividing and shifting attention, right? So that's trying to attend to multiple stimuli. So maybe you're trying to homeschool while you're also trying to listen to this webinar. So being able to shift from one thing to another. And that requires a lot of flexible thinking, which is an executive function. There's some talk about can you multitask or can you not, but this is really just to sort of say at all times, most of us are trying to sort of hold on to a bunch of things in our mind. Sustained attention is the length of attention, right? Our attention span. And then executive attention is regulating our responses to make choices about what we attend to. So all of these are important, and I want to really talk about selective attention. So that's that ability to direct our attention to the desired stimuli, right? So there are some critical factors that we need in that. So alertness is one. We're not alert if we're not attentive, if we're sleep deprived, if we're really hungry. It can be really hard to pay attention. It can be hard to feel alert enough to really choose. And you can probably see that if you're a morning person, that in the morning you're really good and you can answer all your emails, and sort of by the end you're like, oh, what was I doing again, right? So alertness is something that we really need when we're trying to have sustained and selective attention. We also have to be able to filter distractions, which is part of our executive functioning, is being able to say, okay, I'm choosing to pay attention to this instead of that. So filtering our distractions out is can be really hard when you're at home and there's a lot of things going on. Filtering distractions is necessary in selective attention, as well as shifting attention, right, which is that flexible thinking. Attention is limited, so we can't pay attention to all of the things at the same time, right? We can only attend to a certain number of things. It's also limited in terms of our alertness and our stamina. So we might be able to pay attention to something super well in the beginning and it's not so hard. And then throughout the day, we find, oh, okay, this is getting harder and harder. And that's probably related to our alertness level. It's also related to our interest. And this is really important. And you're going to see this point come up again and again in this talk, that our attention is related to what we prefer and what we're interested in, right? And that makes sense, right? If I'm reading two books, and for me, let's say I'm reading like a really fun pop psychology book and I'm really interested in it, I'm going to be flipping the pages, and then you hand me a book about, a civil war general, it's going to be harder for me to pay attention in, right? Because that just happens to be where my areas of interest lie. When it comes to executive functioning, those who have executive dysfunction, so challenges with executive function, there's been a lot of research showing that the reward pathways are a little bit different. So sort of very much broken down, that says that when people who have executive functioning challenges are involved in something that they're very interested in, their brain is highly rewarded for it. So what to you and me could be like a 7 out of 10 fun might be a 10 out of 10 for somebody with executive functioning differences. And also conversely, that they are not as rewarded for things that are non-preferred. So for me, I could be like, oh, this is really a slog. I don't want to have to get to my taxes. Well, that's a 5 out of 10. I can do it. It's pretty boring, but maybe with someone with executive functioning challenges, it's a 2 out of 10. So over rewarded for things that we really like. So that might be sort of where we see hyper focus coming into play, where you might be able to you're really interested in your bench work. You could sit there for hours, you love it. And then when it comes to writing a paper, you can barely get through a paragraph, right? So under rewarded for the things that are non-preferred. So that's something to think about, is our reward pathways when it comes to executive functioning. We also have orienting reflexes for our attention. So strong novel stimuli, it orients us, right? We're going to say, oh, what's that? But then we can habituate to that. So the first time we have a meeting about a big project that we're really excited about, we might be super involved, very alert, very attentive. But maybe the 7th meeting that you feel like, okay, we've talked about the same things again and again, we tend to habituate to that. Attention is also impacted by mental health factors. So if you think about diagnoses really across the board, but we can take anxiety or depression. Our attention is really strongly impacted by those things. If we're anxious, we're going to be attending to things oftentimes that are making us anxious, which then draws attention, because our attention is limited, away from maybe our work. So you can think about, I don't probably have to go through this. You can probably look at this list and in a second think about 15 things in each of these categories where you as an individual biomedical researcher need to have strengths in these, right? So, or how it impacts your day-to-day work. So something like task initiation, getting started on something, organizing, keeping your environment organized, keeping your thoughts organized, keeping your lab notebook organized. So these are critical in individual work, but also in collaboration. And I just want to stop and make the point that this tends to be where people get frustrated with executive functions, both in ourselves, but also in collaboration, right? So we think, okay, they just need to respond to this email, right? You're collaborating. Maybe your executive function is great and you were on time and you gave someone something to review, and then a week later, you're not hearing back, right? So this is where we tend to get frustrated, I think, oftentimes with executive function, both in ourselves, like, oh, I should be able to plan better or prioritize better, but we often tend to get frustrated with our colleagues in these types of situations where we're seeing some executive function challenges. So executive function is impacted by a variety of mental health needs and neuro differences. I think what we all kind of classically think of is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, but really there has been shown that executive function is impacted by a wide range of mental health needs. So it's really important, and we're going to talk about this again and again, to address mental health needs when we're addressing executive functioning challenges. The last two on this list I want to point out. The first is differences in social cognition. So we also know that when we're dealing with executive functioning challenges, oftentimes there's differences in social cognition. So picking up on cues or understanding what's appropriate in one setting versus another setting, or when you're talking to somebody, thinking about the bigger picture. Oftentimes in a conversation, people feel frustrated, like they're starting with the details. What's the bigger picture? They're not really communicating in the way I need them to. So there are differences in social cognition as we're dealing with executive functioning challenges, as well as something called rejection sensitivity. So this is the idea that people who have executive functioning challenges, or if there's executive functioning challenges present, oftentimes can be have increased sensitivity to perceived rejection or perceived correction or punishment. And so you may feel this in yourself. Like when somebody gives you a piece of feedback, you might feel like incredibly devastated, and you might notice it in others and colleagues. Like when I give them any kind of input, it feels like I've kind of demolished them. So that might be something that's a part of this that you might notice. So we're going to talk for a while about the interplay of executive functioning and wellness and mental health. And this is, I think, a really good example of how this comes up. So oftentimes we see executive functioning issues, right? We see, okay, I'm not planning isn't great, or person is struggling to prioritize, or I'm really having a hard time being flexible, and I feel like it has to be this way, and I feel totally stuck here. So we'll see the executive functioning, but a lot of times there's cognitive distortions underlying those. So like Sharon had mentioned in the beginning, incredibly high rates of stress in biomedical researchers. And so what we end up seeing is, imagine the executive difficulty you're seeing is someone isn't responding to an email right away. Well, maybe there's an underlying cognitive distortion of, I haven't done anything and this person's going to be so mad at me. And so they're doing some mind reading. And so I can't reply to them until I get everything done. So then they're not replying, but then they get anxious and say, oh, I'm not going to get anything done here, or I'm going to try and it's going to be a total disaster. So then they're having the cognitive distortion of maybe catastrophizing, which then means not only are they not responding to email, but they're not planning and they're not making a prioritized list of what needs to get done. And right, we see that this can really go around and around with what looks like executive functioning of not getting things done was really an underlying cognitive distortion, which is why we need to address the mental health needs. And you can see sort of at the bottom here that even sort of mild, what the author calls uncontrollable stress, so stress that's not within our control, can cause a rapid and dramatic loss of prefrontal cognitive abilities, that executive functioning part of our brain. And that prolonged stress can sort of really hinder executive function. So you can see we're all under a period of prolonged stress, which means when I hear again and again, I just don't feel productive. I just need to read more. I just need to get back on the track of doing what I need to do. It's just my executive functioning. We're really missing the underlying stressors. So again, this is, stress, anxiety, depression. Executive functioning, we know, is impacted by all of these things. But there are some protective factors, right? So when we target stress and executive functioning at the same time, that can help decrease our mental health issues, and better executive functioning can serve as a protective factor for our mental health and other resilience factors, our emotional health, our behavioral health, and even our physical health. And that when we target these executive functioning skills, that leads us to a higher sense of control and life satisfaction. So what happens when we are struggling with executive function? based on stress is that our brain switches from what we'll call like a top-down approach to a bottom-up approach. So you can see that when we are alert and we're in non-stressful conditions, we think, okay, we can use our reality testing, we can use our error monitoring and our self-monitoring, which is an executive function skill. We have sort of top-down guidance. We can choose what to think about, what to attend to. We can inhibit ourselves, and we can regulate our emotions. When we start to feel stress, our amygdala kicks in. It leads to more of reflexive emotional associations and responses, and we lose some of that ability to use that prefrontal cortex. So I was trying to think of an example, and the one that pops to my mind, because we have a quarantine puppy, is when I am in a alert, non-stressful condition, and she had an accident, and look, it was one time, it was raining, she didn't want to go outside, we'll deal with this and we'll do a little bit better job next day. When I'm really stressed and exhausted, and maybe I haven't eaten enough because I've been working the whole day, then I see the accident, I'm like, this dog's never gonna be potty trained, I don't know what we're gonna do with her, right? So you can see how quickly the exact same scenario changes from a nice top-down approach to a bottom-up approach. So we oftentimes a really good thing to do, and we're going to talk about coping and stress response, but a really good thing to do is take some deep breaths. That sends the signal to our brain, right, that we can sort of switch back on some of that top-down approach. So deep breathing can be really helpful here. So again, executive functioning, we need to think about it in context, right? There's multiple competing demands, there's fast-paced environment, we have high expectations for ourselves and our colleagues, there's neuro differences and general well-being, and I really like this cartoon. And we can look at each one of these little things, right? We can say, oh, they just need to respond to emails, or we just need to get a better calendar in place, or if only had a better planning app, right? But when we are saying, oh, but also I have to homeschool my kids, and also one of my loved ones is sick, and also I was going to renovate my kitchen, so I ripped it out at the beginning of the pandemic, and I still don't have a kitchen, right? There's a lot of things going on, and that might better explain why we're not responding to that email. So let's look at the whole picture of an elephant rather than its parts. Again, I really like this analogy, and I think this really helps us when we're thinking about our colleagues. But we often see executive functioning needs, and yet there's a lot of underlying concerns. So it's critical to think about this as like the whole picture. So then people say, okay, well, then where do I start? If there's all of these contributing factors to executive functioning, where do I start? So we think oftentimes executive functioning is a quick fix. Let's get a calendar in place. Let's create a better planning sheet. Let me make clear expectations. Oh, you're not coming to your lab meeting on time. Let me just put it in my my expectations. Or maybe we just need more regular meetings. And those are really powerful and important tools, but we jump to that and we jump to problem solving, we miss the core issues oftentimes. So if the executive function that we're struggling with is task initiation, and somebody just can't get started with this, well, you could say, all right, well, it's really helpful to set an alert, or you could set a timer on your phone, right? Or do I need to address the cognitive distortions that if I start this project, I'm going to certainly fail? If that's the case, then the timer isn't going to be really that helpful until we address the cognitive distortion, right? So how do we do this? We start with curiosity. So let's think about this as a scenario. Where would we even start here? So you're struggling to submit an abstract. You've been struggling with time management for months, and you can't seem to get started. You stay up late, you can't focus in the morning, and you ignore the alerts you set on your phone telling you to get started. You disregard the schedule you made for yourself, and you don't feel motivated to pay attention for longer than 30 minutes at a time. It's easy to find distraction. You avoid your collaborators because you feel that you have nothing to show for your time. This was always an issue, but has become particularly pronounced since quarantine, since COVID-19 quarantine, right? So this, you can see the executive functions at play here, right? You've got task initiation, task completion, you've got sustained effort, you've got time management, you've got emotion regulation, right? Like probably all of them. So where do we even get started with this? The first place to start is curiosity. So when you're curious about what's going on for you or a colleague, then that really helps to pinpoint the areas to work on, which then increases your avenues for change, right? So if you're only seeing that, tasks aren't getting done, and then you make a calendar, that's sort of a brick wall if that's not working, right? But if we say like, well, what else is going on here? What other things can we do to support either myself or someone else? So here's some just examples of curious questions to try to figure out what's going on for you or a colleague. So are there underlying wellness or mental health issues that need to be supported? Is this recent or something being exacerbated? What is the history? Has it always been hard to get stuff done, or is it really just since, you know, you started also homeschooling your children? The other thing is, you know, like what tools have you tried to use? What has been helpful and what has been not helpful? And we resist using tools when we start to feel overwhelmed. We feel overwhelmed, somebody says, oh, you should just get a better planner. And we think, oh, no, that won't work, right? Oftentimes when we are the most overwhelmed, we need tools the most is when we feel the most resistant to them. So curious question is like, what am I feeling resistant to and where's that coming from? Am I operating from a bottom up or a top down perspective in terms of my brain, what's going on? And also, what aspects of executive functioning am I actually doing pretty well at? And where are the difficulties that are getting in my way? So if we can start having these open, curious conversations with ourselves and maybe even with the people that we trust, be really helpful as we're sort of building strength in our cognitive or in our executive functions. So we want to bolster our executive skills holistically. So you'll see sort of partway down this list, it says concrete executive function strategies, and we're going to get there. We're going to talk about the tools and the apps and the calendars. But before we get there, we need to think about what are the stressors? What is your cognitive load? Overall wellness? Are there reasonable expectations in place? And also, is there kind and realistic self-talk? So I want to take a minute here and say that oftentimes when it comes to executive functioning skills, we feel embarrassed. We feel like I should is a word I hear all the time. I should just be able to do this. It's just an email. Should and just. We know we're not probably having the most kind self-talk there, right? Or the most self-compassion there. I should be able to respond to this. I should be able to get this done. It's just paperwork, right? I should be able to get this done. I could get this done before. So thinking about all of our expectations that we have for ourselves and really taking into consideration the importance of self-compassion when you're working on your executive functioning skills is key. And, you know, Kristen Neff, you can look for her self-compassion research. But this is something that's critical because we feel often embarrassed about our executive function needs. And that can also make it hard then to reach out for supports, which can be really powerful. I mean, to plan an entire experiment on your own, oftentimes, right, we need collaborators. So we need to be able to sort of say, this is something that I'm working on. And the truth is we all struggle with executive functions, right? We all have strengths and needs in that. So the other things like what are our emotional responses and our self-care, and what are our support systems, both formal and informal, that we can reach out to when we're working on our executive functions. So again, like to really drive it home, the key point, right, is that these tools, we need to work in harmony with these concrete tools as well as our wellness tools. If we don't look at the whole picture, we're likely to miss what's under the surface there. Both for ourselves and for our colleagues. Self-compassion is particularly key here. So I'm going to go through the executive functions, several of them that I find, you know, probably critically important as in the biomedical research world is in my work together with Sharon and biomedical researchers. So this one is a little bit elongated on the well-being concerns, and then for each one, we'll talk a little bit about well-being and about those concrete skills. And, you know, it's sort of an arbitrary dichotomy because we need to do both of them, but asking yourselves that curious question can help you figure out where to start. So for planning and prioritizing, if we think about all of the things that could potentially get in the way, here's just a list of a handful of them. So our mental health, anxiety, we're feeling like, oh, this isn't going to work. So we're avoiding. That needs to be managed as we're thinking about how we're making plans. If we're numbing, so instead of watching one episode of something on Netflix, you're watching 6. If you're feeling overwhelmed or worried about disappointing others, making mistakes, having to get everything perfect, that's really going to get in the way of planning and prioritizing. Because if you think I can't make one wrong move, it's going to be hard to prioritize, right? Because at some point, something is going to have to come below another. Even fears about assertiveness can be hard when it comes to planning and prioritizing. If we think about, well, I think I can do this plan, but I then need to talk to somebody, one of my higher ups, about saying, okay, well, I thought I could do X, Y, and Z, but really I need a little bit, I need a little less work over here so I can do this. It's hard then to be assertive. So dealing with our assertiveness fears even can be a part of a planning and prioritizing as we're talking about well-being. So for those concrete executive functioning skills, so let's talk about these, and they're going to come up again and again. And I think that's a little bit where the arbitrary dichotomy, the arbitrary division for all of these executive functioning skills come in, because a lot of these are important for most of our executive functioning skills. Sorry if you can hear my dogs barking too. So the first one on this, as we're thinking about planning and prioritizing, is routines. So we want both small routines, short routines, as well as larger routines when we're making a plan. So as you plan to do, let's say, a very long experiment, you want to plan out the routines that you're going to do every week. These are the days I'm going to go into work. These are the days that I'm going to work from home. These are the times that I want to be there. What routine do I need to do? How am I going to get there? These really large routines, as well as smaller routines, right? Like, let's say that every day you realize around 1 o'clock that you haven't eaten because you're so involved in what you're doing. Well, a routine could be every night before I leave, I throw 3 power bars in my bag. It's so small routines. And the more we can make a routine, the less, and the more we can plan it, the less that we have to sort of use up some of that other attention and brain power. So really routinizing as much as you can. For making plans, it's important to put rewards in. Now, we talked about this, the differences of reward pathways for those with executive functioning challenges. And what that also means is that those longer term rewards, they just don't feel as rewarding as right now. I like what I'm doing right now. So think about short-term rewards as you're making a plan. All right, in my plan, I need to save 15 minutes of the last 15 minutes of every hour to be able to take a walk or text a friend, right? Which is the same sort of as breaks, but find something that you find rewarding that you can be like, okay, well, it's so boring, but let me create these small rewards. And also think about those long-term rewards, right? What is it that is so important to you about getting this paper published? And I'm sure that that's a relatively easy thing for most people to say, okay, well, these are the reasons why it's important to me, but to really think about those and write them down and concretize them, right? So that you realize, like, okay, this 15th piece of paperwork that I'm submitting right now is sort of in service to an end goal that you can then sort of really concretize and see. Breaks are important, but breaks that are not distracting are important, right? So a little bit distracting, but not too distracting. And that's where some of that hyper focus comes in. We want to be mindful that we're not doing breaks that we then can't pull ourselves away from. So maybe, that spinny wheel that says, would you like to keep watching this episode, right? Maybe that's too hard to click no. Oh, well, it already started. I might as well watch it, right? So thinking about breaks that are more sort of either time limited or not so rewarding that we can't pull ourselves away from them. There's a variety of planning apps, calendars, that you can use as you're creating plans and as you're prioritizing. And sometimes a calendar is really helpful because something might feel incredibly urgent, and yet you realize it's not due for 4 weeks. Well, how can you break it down into smaller steps, which leads us to appropriate deadlines. I always tell people that I work with to give yourself more time than you think you need. Because that way, if there's procrastination or something else comes up that you didn't realize, you don't feel so stressed that you're bumping up against it. So really thinking through, okay, well, this is actually due on Monday, but I'm going to try to get it done on Thursday so that if I need to work on Friday on it, then I can have that time. Setting phone reminders and alerts again, and I'll also list, help out your working memory. So working memory is the, concept that we hold things in our minds and then we have to manipulate them while they're in our minds. So when you have a phone alert or a reminder or a list, you're sort of taking some of that pressure off of your mind to sort of hold it all together. And I actually do this. I always have a piece of paper next to my workstation. And so that when I'm have a bunch of things that I'm manipulating and thinking about in my mind, I can write it down so I can get it out of my mind onto my paper, so I don't have to keep holding on to it while I'm trying to do whatever else I'm doing. And that really helps me prioritize. Okay, I am focusing on this now, and then I will do that later. Your support system. So this is where it comes into play also, is as you're making plans and as you're prioritizing, use your support system. You don't have to make all of your plans by yourself. It can be incredibly helpful to say, hey, can I run this by you? I think that this is the most important thing, but I'm not totally sure. Can I run it by you? So you can use your support system. And if you're working through the wellness parts of it, using your support system for that as well, both formal and both informal and maybe more formal supports when it comes to wellness. And then identifying what's most important. And we're going to talk about triage in the next slide. So problem solving and decision making, again, you can see this is a lot of similar things. So setting priorities with reasonable expectations. That means reasonable expectations when it comes to sort of your own well-being as well, right? So setting routines as much as possible. So I like to think about routines in like sort of every aspect of life. The more you can make something a routine, the less sort of cognitive load it requires, the more you can use your executive functioning and your attention for other things. So imagine that every morning you woke up and you're like, should I exercise today? Do I not want to exercise? What kinds of things do I need to do, right? Is it writing day? It's not writing day, right? So if you have a routine, okay, this is on Mondays and Tuesdays, I spin. On Wednesdays and Thursdays, I go for a walk. Every Tuesday, I do my laundry. It's just what I do in the evening, whatever it is. The more you can make a routine, the less cognitive load, the more space you have for other things. Every day, I write for 20 minutes, whatever it is. So routinize as much as you can. And then create reminder systems, right? You don't have to remember that every Tuesday I do my laundry. You could put a calendar app or a reminder in your phone. Okay, it's Tuesday, it's 9 o'clock. Yeah, I'm gonna get my laundry going, right? So you don't have to sort of keep everything in your mind. The more you can get things down into paper, into systems that work for you, the less cognitive load you're gonna have. When it comes to decision making and prioritizing triage, so a tool I like to use is, right, is it urgent and important? Is it non-urgent and important? Or is it non-urgent and non-important? And I suppose something could be urgent and not important too, but that's probably more rare. But, thinking about if it's urgent and important, okay, what's that chunk of things? And when do I need to get that chunk of things done? Okay, this is really important, but it's not urgent. Then that's where you can bring in your calendars, right? And your lists. Where can I put those on the calendar? Thinking about timelines as small steps. So I think oftentimes we think about timelines in these really like large, broad things, but to support executive functioning can be really helpful to say, okay, this is the large scale picture. What does that translate into? And people with executive functioning challenges, oftentimes things get lost in translation between the large scale and the small steps. So if I say, okay, can you go in there and clean your room for me? There's that's kind of vague. Like, what is it? My room, my clean, your clean, where do things go, right? Versus smaller things of, can you make sure that at the end of the day, all of the samples are in the freezer labeled, right? So really sort of trying to make timelines at the end of every day, this is what I'm going to do, or by the end of this week, this is what I would like to see happen. Again, use your supports. This is sort of a theme that comes up again and again. Organization. So this is a big one. I think a lot of people think about organization because not only does it help us, but it also helps a collaborative team, especially in the lab space where people are sharing spaces, people are sharing hoods, people are sharing freezers. So organization is, I think, a big one that comes up again and again that I hear a lot about. So something that I really like to think about is creating sustainable systems, right? And finding ones that work for you. There are a lot of different types of organization systems that you can have. Do the ones that feel the most natural. So an example I have is, I've lived in my house for several years, and every single time I tried to get tinfoil out, I opened the knife drawer. So now I'm starting to realize maybe the knife drawer is in the wrong place. Maybe I need to switch some things around, right? So finding things that feel sustainable to you, whether it's like you walk into your home and there's a bowl for keys as soon as you walk in, things that feel sort of natural and they go with the natural flow of your environment. You can spend some time at the end of every day, again, as a routine, cleaning up, and it will feel a little bit less overwhelming. Or even, I know people who do this where they set a 5-minute timer and everyone has to clean up as much as they can, as quickly as they can. Again, creating catch-all buckets. I know people who have one for each person in their family, and at the end of every week, each person has to take their bucket to their place and look through it. This is obviously a little bit different in a work environment, but creating a system that works for you, even if that means, hey, my papers look a little messy and it doesn't bother anybody, but it works for me, as long as you're not losing things, as long as you're really checking in with yourself. The other thing is, and this is important, I think we forget this often, is that oftentimes physical disorganization can impact our overall wellness and vice versa. So are you looking at a basket of laundry and you're thinking like, oh, I just really am bored by laundry and I'd really just rather be out and doing other things? Or are you thinking, I can't even look at this laundry because it reminds me that, no, I'm just a mess and I can't do anything right? Right. And those are two very different things when it comes to physical organization. And so what do we need to address first? Creating a system or addressing the underlying mental health and wellness factors? The same thing I would consider mental organization is really like feeling like you have your thoughts straight and that you can sort of understand what's going on and that you can think clearly. And so again, the mental health and wellness is a priority there, but also put things into writing or create a visual, do what works for you. Some people learn from an auditory, so creating an auditory recording and listening to it back, right? Doing what works for you, but not having to sort of keep everything in your mind. Support your working memory. Use visuals, use auditory things. And also use wellness tools. If you're feeling really disorganized or really confused, take a break. Maybe do a journaling exercise. Get some physical exercise in. Some people like calming exercise for that, like yoga, and some people like really high intensity exercise to sort of clear their thoughts. The other thing I like to do is called a preview and a review as we're trying to get organized mentally. So this is preview. What is it that I think is going to happen? What's my plan? That's a preview. And then you do it. And then you come back and you do a review. So how did it go? What went well? What was confusing? Which parts did I need to change? And that can help overall sort of in a more long-term way with organization. Remaining flexible. So flexibility is an executive function that refers to not only changing paths and helping us get unstuck, but also seeing things from other people's perspective, right? Which is pretty important when you're working in a collaborative team. And what we find is that oftentimes we get really stuck when we get stuck in this yellow circle. So Kelly Donahue is a colleague of ours who created this visual, which we use all the time now. There are things that we cannot control, things that we wish we could control, but we can, and things that we can control. And so I often have people actually get 3 different pieces of paper and make lists of each of these. Right. And so the things that make us the most frustrated, that get us the most stuck and leave us the least flexible are often things that we wish we had control over that we do not. So if we can focus in on the things we can control, or even the little parts of the things that we can control, then that helps us increase our flexible thinking and our growth mindset, helps us with our follow through, and it helps us with our problem solving so we don't feel so stuck. And that includes working to see things from other people's perspective. So for working memory, again, working memory is holding something in our mind and also manipulating the information. So, I think cooking is a wonderful example for working memory of like, okay, I remember I have to do this recipe and I put a little bit of salt in, but I have to remember to taste it later. And does it need more salt? Right? Like that's all our working memory is, like trying to figure out how we are manipulating things in our mind. Again, we know that stress, high cognitive load, competing demands, and mental health needs, that gets in the way of our working memory. But some tools that you can use, again, it's nice in a way that all of these tools are relatively similar, because when you're using one to help with one executive function, you get the benefit of that it's helping with other executive functions. So breaking down tasks, like I said, into sort of smaller, more concrete things so things don't get lost in translation, making sure that everyone's on the same page about like what tasks are to be done and sort of by whom, setting reminders and alarms and having shared calendars. checklists, organization apps. So what I say is like, this is a lot, right? To have an organization app and a checklist and a calendar, it's a lot of different systems going on. So find what works for you and pick one and try it. And then if you need to add something on top, that's okay too. And some people say, I never use a checklist. I look at it, I feel really overwhelmed, and then I don't do anything, right? And so maybe lists don't work for you, but also maybe if we address some of the underlying wellness concerns, then lists might be more helpful after that. Task initiation is getting started on something. So a lot of these things, again, are a similar vein to what we've talked about. But there's a couple that I really want to sort of point out here. One of them is determining motivation. So when we're having trouble getting started, a lot of times we're having trouble getting motivated. So determine what your motivation is. And if you're like, I don't know, it's like, that's a really long ways away. I don't know, I'm having trouble. Yeah, I want to get this paper in under the deadline, but I've still got 2 weeks and I don't know, I could do some other things between now and then. What is your motivation? And also, do you need to add in motivation? Right. And that's where sort of some of those rewards come into play, right? Do I need to add in motivation? Do I need to check in and have somebody who's helping me be accountable? Do I need to say, okay, I really, I'm so into the show, I'm going to watch it after I'm done with writing for 30 minutes? Do I need to say, okay, here's in the long term what I'm really hoping for. Let me break it down and say, okay, I really want to be able to publish because I'm really hoping to get to this next stage in my career. So why is that important to me? So spending some time really thinking about motivation, because if we don't, what our selective attention will do is often go to whatever is preferred, and then we'll have trouble getting started. The other thing that I want to think about is decreasing distractions. So oftentimes when we have executive functioning difficulties, it's really hard to sort of filter out distractions, right? That's some of that selective attention. So making sure that when you're doing something that oftentimes you struggle with getting started with, that you can be in an environment where distractions are decreased. And I realize as I'm saying this, that during a pandemic, that might not be possible for everybody, but are there ways that you can use earplugs or headphones? Or can you get support from somebody and say, I need you to watch the kids for 30 minutes. I need to write for 30 minutes. Are there ways that you can sort of decrease distractions? Because I think that can be really helpful when it comes to task initiation. Do you need to just open your Word and open all the tabs you need with your with searches and then not open any more tabs? So really thinking about decreasing distractions as part of this. Impulse control, again, can be really hard, and I think probably particularly hard when we're struggling with our emotion regulation, as they tend to go hand in hand. But this is the idea that we can sort of stop ourselves from doing something that either we really want to do or we feel compelled to do. And this stop sign is one of my favorite things. I have it printed out everywhere. So when you are about to do something that maybe you have this inkling of like, I don't know if I should do this or not, stop, take a breath, open up your mind and think about what are my options here, and then pick the option that feels right to you. And I think a really good example is like you get an email that kind of makes you mad and you start typing away, right? And my thing is like, if your fingers are angry, take them off the keyboard, stop, take a breath. What are my options here? And do I have to respond right away? Can I wait? Can I call a friend and say, what would you say in this situation? Like, what are your options here? And then pick one that you think feels right to you. And oftentimes that also includes waiting until you feel a little bit calmer, which leads us into emotion regulation. And I encourage you, if you haven't, to look at the anxiety mental health talk. I went through relax, distract, cope in a really in-depth way. But this is what I really like to think about, a powerful tool for emotion regulation. So it's first, we need to relax. We need to relax our bodies. So what can you do to sort of help you relax your body when you're feeling a lot of strong emotions? So deep breathing, I already mentioned. Grounding exercises are exercises that are meant to sort of bring us back to the present moment. So one that I really like is called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that is name 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can feel, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And that sort of brings us back to like that current moment, sort of help re-regulate and kick back on our top-down approach. Guided meditation, yoga, exercise, taking a shower, walking away, anything that you can do to sort of work on sort of soothing your body in those moments. And then if we really need to, moving on to distraction. Okay, I can't answer this email right now, it's too much. I need to sort of distract myself, right? So all this is a list of things that people do as really healthy distractions, right? Everything in moderation. But, I think that probably everyone has their things that they do to distract themselves. And then when it's time, coming back and coping, right? So that means maybe journaling about it, talking to somebody, dealing with cognitive distortions, making a plan, right? And then if needed, accessing professional help and resources. So after we've sort of calmed our body, then sort of coming back to cope. This one is about sustained effort and focus on non-preferred tasks. So I think we all probably struggle with this of like, you get this paper in and you're really excited, and then you realize there's 15, 20 items of paperwork that you have to do on top of that, right? And so like, I just can't seem to get that done, right? So again, addressing your overall well-being. I added it here to the physical self-care, right? Sustained effort is really hard when you haven't slept and you haven't really had a good meal and you haven't been outside in 3 days, right? And you're just like really drained. Part of that alertness is physically taking care of yourself. When's the last time that I had water? Oh, it was yesterday. I've only had coffee today. Okay, maybe I need to stop and take a minute. Having realistic expectations for your sustained effort, because oftentimes what ends up happening is we say, okay, I'm going to do it all tomorrow. And then it's like, oh, I'm overwhelmed by that. I'm not going to do any of it, right? So having realistic expectations and self-compassion in those times, the concrete planning, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to take a break, or I'm going to give myself a reward. Okay, I'm going to do it for 20 minutes and I'm going to set a timer, or I need to do it at 3 o'clock. I'm going to set my alarm. And having really specific goals. I'm going to do half of the first sheet today, and then I'm going to email it to somebody else. And creating deadlines for yourself. Again, accessing supports, accountability, just clearly, as well as, I need help with this, or this is a lot going on, right? Making sure that you're getting support. Combating boredom is a big one, right? A lot of times we struggle with sustained effort because it feels really, really boring to us. So again, that's where I think a lot of times rewards come in, and sort of thinking about like, what is the intention of me doing this? Why do I need to be doing this? And how can I make it? Because some people need to like, okay, I'm going to listen to music while I do it. If I can attend to music right while I do this, or I'm going to do this for, 5 minutes and I'm going to sort of sit next to somebody, and we're going to do our things together, right? So thinking about ways, and sometimes saying like, okay, this is going to feel really boring, and acknowledging that and saying, I only have to do it for 15 minutes today. Or I'm going to do it all today, and that way it'll be done. Also managing our distractions, and managing the hyperfocus that might come from, oh, this is other thing that's really, really interesting. And 7 o'clock and I haven't started this thing I need to do. So really trying to sort of manage and create deadlines and routines like we talked about. You can see how all of these things really interplay and support each other. And time management, I think that's, so time management, again, a lot of the same things that sort of come up again and again in executive functioning, right? You can see how organization apps and timers and reminders can really help us with time management, but also really thinking about like that idea of hyper focus, that we can really get carried away, and that maybe setting timers even for the fun things can be really helpful. Here is the Pomodoro timer. So I think a lot of people probably know about the Pomodoro technique of taking meaningful breaks and sort of saying, I'm going to focus on this for a certain amount of time. The other thing about time management is that it can be hard for us to set realistic time goals. So something to think about as you're working with time management is, really trying to ask yourself, like, how do things usually work in the past? So if we tell ourselves like, oh, this time I'm going to do it, like this time I'm going to do everything in one day, but that sort of never has worked for you, try a different strategy, set realistic time goals. We all know somebody who says like, I'm definitely going to be at that meeting on time today, and they're always 10 minutes late, right? So set realistic goals. What is realistic for you? And then work backwards from there. Again, here are some more concrete self-care and wellness tools. These 6 are from the ACEs study, and we know that they serve as really amazing protective factors. So sleep, exercise, nutrition, mindfulness, healthy relationships, and mental health. And then finally, I really want to think about this idea of self-monitoring as a executive function. So self-monitoring is the idea that we can like check in with ourselves and see like how are things going, and then make adjustments as appropriate. So this is part of that curiosity. You can use that as the curiosity before you decide which executive skills to work on, and you can use it while you're working on your executive skills, and you can use it as a review after you've tried something. How did it go? So these are really curious questions you can ask yourself as you're trying to sort of, in every stage of your executive functioning development, sort of check in. So how am I feeling? What yardsticks do I want to use to determine how much progress I'm making? Where are my stress points and what are my worries, right? You can see how that integrates that wellness, overall wellness. How much do I realistically want to accomplish this week? What are the signs that I need to look for that tell me I need to change course, right? What if there are some tools that I'm using? How do I know if they're even working? What are the pros and cons of how I'm handling this? And what are realistic ways that I can check in on my own progress? And then how do I handle it, right? If things come up, how am I going to handle that? What is my support system and how am I using them and how am I accessing them? And are there things that are getting in the way of accessing them? Am I too embarrassed to tell someone I'm struggling? Or am I just too forgetful? Or somebody texts me and I forget to text back. How can I sort of text back right away or put a note in my calendar to respond? Do I have to worry about giving other status updates, or am I sharing what I'm working on? How might this seem to other people? What cognitive distortions am I having? So you can really think about like, how do I get helpful feedback and how often do I need it, right? So this is all part of self-monitoring. The other thing I really want to point out that's critically important is that there are safe and effective ways to get professional help. So there are executive function coaches who will work primarily on these concrete tools with you, setting up apps, setting up calendars, setting up tools with you to sort of support you in executive functioning. There's also therapy, which helps with that, as well as the underlying wellness, right? It's a safe and supportive, non-judgmental environment that's confidential. And it's really a place for you to go to have sort of an unbiased third party to help work through some of these challenging things. And they tailor, it's tailored to what is important to you, and you work at your pace. So it's a good place to learn and practice skills and address areas of concern specifically for you in sort of a non-judgmental, confidential environment. The other thing with executive functioning, if it reaches a clinical level, is that there are medications to help with this. So speak with your primary care physician. That's where I'm recommending people are going now, but also you can consult with psychiatry as well. So here are some resources, again, like Sharon said in the beginning, the mental health and well-being series, finding, EAP or student health services at your campus, as well as private therapists. Pretty much most therapists at this point are working through telehealth, and some are starting to come back. And then just some resources on how to find therapy, as well as resources. Now, there are a few books that I like. Berkeley is pretty deeply involved in executive functions. The Everyday Executive Functions Attention Fix is really focused on students, but it provides a really nice, clear outline for executive functions and what they are, and has some nice assessments in there. There are apps that change every day and websites. So looking up, like, how do I stay organized, or how do I better manage my time? Those things can be really helpful, as well as medical professionals can be really useful resources like therapists and psychiatrists and your primary care physician. All right.
Great. Thank you, Lori. Unfortunately, we're over a little bit and we won't have actually any time to take questions. We're just going to take the first one that was voted by the most people, but there are a lot of stellar questions. So please stay and come to the groups. I'm going to, Lori, if you go ahead to the next slide, people can get the Zoom link. So if you could address for everyone before we move on, how they can tell the difference between sort of stress and cognitive load and executive functioning issues so that people can decide where to start with interventions and strategies.
I think a really good thing to start with is your history. So what has this been like for you? Is this something that has been ongoing? And do you notice a change with higher stressors and higher cognitive loads? Or even without the cognitive loads, is this something where you notice that you're struggling with attention or struggling with responding to things and time management? So I think, thinking about, a longitudinal perspective is probably a really good place to start. I also think that if you're having stress, that's usually a good place to start. And then if the stress decreases and the executive function continues, then oftentimes we know that those things are both existent, but would exist even without each other.
Great, thank you. That was an amazing talk. I needed to hear some of those strategies myself, and I know from all of the comments that people really felt the same. I hope that people will join us at the small groups. There are a lot of really good questions there. The one that just every time gets me is this, I really want to take care of myself, but there's no time. And, maybe I just need to push through. And we really need to change that view within our community. It comes from so many different messages that we get. So please come to the groups. The meeting ID is 161-481-5527. Please go ahead and join. I'm really sorry. There's a lot of people asking for me to copy the link. Unfortunately, I can't do that from my computer right now. You just need to join Zoom and put in the meeting ID, and it will route you there. A couple of things. Some people don't come and they tell me afterward it feels uncomfortable. I think these are uncomfortable discussions and important ones. And I think we've reached a point where if we can sit a tiny bit with the discomfort, we'll get a lot more out of it. Come and keep your camera off. It's okay. Come and listen. Come and put into the chat, this is my first time and I'm stressed about being here, and somebody will offer some support. We are not taping in the small groups. The discussions are confidential. We will take a break. I'll keep this open long enough to try to copy in the link. And I hope that we'll see you in the small groups in a moment. Thank you.